Hello, and welcome to this Rain Taxi virtual event. I'm Eric Lorber. I'm the director of Rain Taxi, and I'm so delighted you could be with us here tonight for this celebration of the picture book. If you don't know about Rain Taxi, we're a nonprofit organization that champions literature of all kinds, and we do it in many ways. The core has always been a quarterly magazine. We've actually just received our 101st issue from the printer, and we'll be getting that in the mail to our members soon. So if you want to join up and get that in the mail yourself, hop on over to our website at any time after this event and check it out. Another way we serve literature is through author events like this one. Most of them are free to attend, but if you're able to pitch in a little bit, you can use the donate button at the bottom of your screen. Every little bit helps, and though we're privileged to receive funding from such places as the National Endowment for the Arts and the Minnesota State Arts Board, our most vital supporters are individuals like you who contribute what they can. There are a lot of ways you can participate with us tonight. You can use the chat, of course. It's always great to see you chiming in there with your excitement, your ideas, your observations. Please keep that coming. You can use the Ask a Question box, and we'll be collecting those throughout the event. So if you have a question for any of our guests tonight, put it in there, and we'll try to get to some of those toward the end. And then, of course, most importantly, you can buy the book. And the book you'd be buying is The Snail with the Right Heart, the new picture book written by Maria Popova, illustrated by Ping Zhu. We are so delighted to be able to delve a little deeper into this book tonight with Claudia Bedrick, the publisher of Enchanted Lion Books, one of the premier picture book publishers in the land, in the world, I think. Ping Zhu, the illustrator of this book, and this is the second book by Ping I have on my shelf. I can't wait for that shelf to grow and grow and grow. And to lead our conversation with these two wonderful people is Bruce Handy. Bruce is an esteemed journalist and critic of children's literature. He's written an amazing book called Wild Things, which certainly explained to me why, as an adult, I still like children's books so much. And I recommend that to you if you're in that boat as well. He is also going to be entering the ranks of children's authors, and I hope we'll hear a little bit about that tonight as well. So, with all this in mind, welcome to you all. We're so delighted to have you, and take it away, Bruce.
Great, thanks. I think we're all delighted to be here. I certainly am, and I'm really especially delighted to be talking about a book that I happen to love. Here it is again. I think this is an amazing book because it really accomplishes a lot. I mean, it's very ambitious and it touches on evolution. It touches on genetics. It touches on snail reproduction, which was something I didn't know anything about before. And it focuses on a rare condition called cetus inversus, or as Maria's text explains, that's Latin for inverted internal organs, which means that an organism's body is kind of a mirror image of most organisms. So in the case of humans and snails as well, that means the heart is on the right instead of the left. That's the title of the book. And one thing that I think that just moves and delights me about this book is the way that it touches on all this material, which in some ways is difficult, complicated material, but it does it just so gracefully and organically, both in Maria's texts and as well as Ping's illustrations. And I think we were hoping to start, Ping was going to just read like the first few pages just so people who aren't familiar with the book can get a sense of kind of its scope and how it works. So Ping, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you for being here and having me. This is the book, and much like a children's library, I will be reading a few pages to get you acquainted with the story and also introducing you to our hero, Jeremy. So, The Snail with the Right Heart is a true story. Long ago, before half the stars that speckle the sky were born, and before the mountains rose, reaching for them, a giant ocean covered the earth. One day, something strange happened in the giant ocean, a change so mysterious and magnificent that it was given a special name, mutation. From this mutation, life was born from non-life, and the first living creatures, tinier than a grain of sand, tinier than the tip of the eyelash of a mouse, came into being. Time tended to them kindly. They grew bigger and bigger, curiouser and curiouser. Soon, which in cosmic time means millions and millions of years, they crawled out of the ocean and onto the land. Not knowing whether they would find a home there, some of these brave early explorers carried their homes on their backs, and so snails took to the earth. Soon, more millions and millions of years later, humans were walking the earth alongside them. So that is a short intro to the story. I don't want to spoil the whole book for you. I hope that you do still want to read the rest of it, but I will be putting this back in the corner, and I hope you enjoyed those spreads.
Thanks, Ping. I think, you know, I think just in those what I think that was four spreads, you do see, you know, you see the scope and the ambition of this book. I want to start, Claudia, ask you about, you know, I think it's so fascinating the way this book, and you've done, Enchanted Lion has done a number of other nonfiction picture books, including this one I'm also going to hold up and plug. Whoops, there we go. The Strange Birds of Flannery O'Connor, which Ping also illustrated. Yeah, and Claudia, I wonder if you could talk, and Ping too, just about the. I'm so interested in the how do you balance? You know, I think a good picture book, you know, has a kind of a poetry and enchantment to it, and how do you balance that with doing nonfiction, where, you know, you have a certain kind of responsibility to the truth and to you know, just the kind of the discipline of reality and nonfiction.
Thanks for that question, Bruce, and everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you, Eric, for having us. You know, Aristotle tells us to hold true to the phenomena, and I think that that is the core responsibility of nonfiction and of science as well. And so that's the first thing, that you have to be responsible to the facts, and you have to be responsible to incorporating them and presenting them in any work of nonfiction. But at the same time, we all know that the truth of every life and the truth of every situation is larger than the verifiable facts. And one of the, I think, really beautiful things about narrative nonfiction is that we have both art and story as tools, or perhaps like the best technologies we know of, for exploring and reaching for and rendering those larger truths. And so, you know, that's the other part of nonfiction, is that none of our CV, none of the facts of our lives encompass us as human beings, and so much of what happens in the world is not encompassed by those facts as well. And so that's where story and art comes in. And I think in this case, as you've already noted, I mean, Maria starts with a very small story about a small, unusual snail, but uses that, understands the larger story within that of genetics and time and change, of randomness and chance and circumstance, and reaches for that larger story in a really lyrical and beautiful way that doesn't undercut or change or dismiss the facts, but raises them up. And then Ping comes in with like the sweep of her brush and renders a world that we feel emotionally and bodily, and that's what makes this story stick with us. We can understand it in a different way, because it's not just facts on a page, but it's this bigger frame of experience that tells us something deeper about what's embedded in those facts.
Well, I like also that, I mean, that's another thing I wanted to mention about the book too, because I think it also, without hitting you over the head at all, the way you know, sometimes can happen in children's books, but I think it has certain implications for how, you know, how humans can live their lives, and you know, how we should, you know, how we can maybe look at the world in a kind of a broader more open way, which I really love. Ping, do you want to talk about about that at all, and how what it was like for you working on this book? And this is your second, this is your second book, both for Claudia and also your second nonfiction picture book.
Yeah, so in a way, this is the only type of picture book I know how to make as of now. Yeah, I agree.
You gotta get you a fairy tale or something. Yeah.
I know, give me something that's totally fictional. See how I do. I think a lot of the bringing the art into the story, especially when it's something like nonfiction, is that so much of the things that occur in this particular book are things that none of us have ever seen before, even though they're fact. Like humans walked the earth like thousands of years ago, and there was time before then, and like where life started and all those kinds of things, and how mutation happened. Like we know these as facts, but we don't know what it looked like. We can only base it on the research and assumptions that we can draw from what we know. And in that sense, it creates a little open space for that to be interpreted and visualized, because there's no way to necessarily verify the visuals of that in the same way that you can verify the facts. So
I'm just going to show the I think this is kind of the spread you're talking about, right?
Yeah, so the ones leading up to it that I had showed earlier as well, how basically I started with nothing, and I wanted to kind of bring the audience into what life all of a sudden became for us, and what we know of it as like now and currently. That you're starting basically, like, we can all imagine what nothing is, and we can imagine what like everything is, but to be able to kind of take Maria's words and turn them into that visual story, I didn't want to literally draw her text, because I think that reduces the interest of like what my part of the job is. So being able to kind of play around with what her words could look like, keeping in mind what reality looks like, and also kind of the emotional heft of what millions of years looks like, it was very interesting to me. And I also think, because the subject of this book is also the snail, I had talked to Claudia early on when she showed me the manuscript that one thing I didn't want to do was to turn this book into a solidly like brown and green book as far as colors go, because snails are not the most colorful creatures. They're largely existing in like dirt and earth. So being able to kind of explore what's something up close that we don't get to see all the time with our own eyes, in that amount of detail, was also an opportunity to kind of take things into a different realm that we could lend a little bit of imagination in. So, yeah.
Well, I love that. Yeah, that evolution. It reminds me of that famous edit in 2001 where it goes from like the bone in the air to the spaceship. I mean, you've almost done the same thing, just in one spread. You've made that like huge leap.
Yeah, it is difficult to paint millions of years. So if anyone has any suggestions or recommendations, I'm happy to hear it.
Well, no, but I think you solved that. You solved that beautifully. I wonder if you could talk more about the snails, because I think it's interesting, because you obviously have taken liberties, with the colors of the snails, but I always feel at the same time it's still very grounded in a reality. I mean, it never gets. I don't mean this as an insult, because I love Pixar, but it doesn't get like Pixar-y or anything like that. It still feels real, even though, I mean, you've got, I don't know, practically the whole rainbow in that thing. But could you talk about that? That seems like that must be, just as an artist, that's a very delicate balancing act, I would think.
Sure. Yeah. I think, especially wanting to make this book as colorful as possible. I think not only because it helps tell an emotional story, it also kind of, draws the eye, it makes things more interesting. I think that color is relative, right? So just because you can't see it, or it's not its overall color, doesn't mean that it's not somehow there. Like, what if it's kind of like a reflective color, or the environment in which it's in. These kinds of exaggerated situations, from spread to spread, really influences the way that I was imagining these spreads to be. So you can kind of see behind me, I have tacked up like these sketches for the book before I started painting them. And basically these spreads exist as like kind of color maps for me to work through each page, because unlike just doing one image, doing a whole storybook involves kind of seeing what the color story will be from beginning to end. And this was also something I did with Flannery, and I don't know, maybe invented this thing for myself called the color worm that Claudia is familiar with, which is basically I basically pulled a bunch of colors on Photoshop just to kind of quickly paint out like the entire timeline of the story. And I wanted to see all the colors at once that were going to exist in the book and how that they would all sit together. And if that was like harmonious, or, you know, if it made sense to have like more desaturated colors in the beginning and then gradually move into more saturated combinations when the story was getting more climactic or interesting, or when things change, or when death occurs, you know, like all these things can be told through color as well as text. So a lot of that was based on really what I always think of it like an emotional story first on top of like the nonfiction part of it, just to see how readers feel when they're like how I felt when I read the manuscript for the first time and what kind of story that was telling, and trying to kind of piece together what colors make the most sense for those emotions, right? So, and I also like kind of playing around with things that don't necessarily feel very obvious, you know, like people don't think of bright colors for death. People don't like to think of like, you know, reds for nature, or I mean, like foliage or things like that, for example. So I like to try and push things in different directions to try and reassociate what people can think about when they imagine something like very up close or very far away that, you know, they can't necessarily verify with their own eyes. Like maybe it takes a microscope or a telescope. So, you know, then I feel like I'm free to kind of play around a little bit, and, you know, hopefully nobody gets mad about that.
Well, yeah, and I love that too, that the yeah, especially because, you know, snails don't really have expressions and stuff. So you are using, you know, telling a lot with using color to convey a lot of kind of emotion and movement and all kinds of things. How much, Claudia, maybe you could talk. I'm curious about how much did Maria's text really? How much did she ask for? I know sometimes. You know, writers, and I think I've done this, you know, have pretty specific ideas of what they think, you know, what they think an image should look like to go with their text, and they sort of have it all divvied out in, you know, in terms of how this, you know, the spread should go and how the text should break from page to page. But what was Maria's process, and what was your process as, you know, editing her with that?
I mean, Maria didn't come with a lot of illustration notes. In fact, she had really just about none. I mean, she did. There's a representation of the Big Dipper, and she did want that to be correct. And then she had one request in terms of the boy who's represented in the book. And I think Ping gave you a picture. Is that correct? For you to depict that? Is it for you to depict?
Oh yeah, she did send. I can show the spread as well.
But otherwise, it's true. I mean, many authors, you know, submit manuscripts with really long illustration notes, and it was not the case at all with Maria, who knows Ping's work and was completely delighted to have Ping envisioning her story, and I think had every confidence, you know, in what Ping would do. And so that was a space that Ping could really freely inhabit and feel confident about inhabiting, because the license had been given for that.
So it was like, I don't know, there's the passage about it explains, you know, how recessive genes work, which is actually, it's really great passage. I mean, actually, I think it was one of the first times I felt like I understood that. But so so you had to figure out, how do I illustrate that? What does that look like? Maria wasn't giving you.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of very, you know, maybe illustrating it literally would not have been the best approach to it. You know, there's parts about how snails reproduce. There's, you know, like it's not necessarily about like that fact. It's, you know, they're talking about snails reproducing as a choice with each other rather than with themselves, which they're able to do as well. So, you know, when I read the text, I'm trying to read between the lines as well to not interpret everything literally. And it was great that Maria gave me free rein, because I think as an illustrator, as an artist, it sometimes does contaminate your thought process when you're trying to come at something with a pure approach, like an untainted mind as to what comes up when you're reading the text for the first time, rather than having someone else's ideas that you need to either remove or, you know, build on top of. So I think that really lent itself to like the imaginative aspects of this story. It also made it made me very nervous when I was when I had to show her the paintings at the end, that, you know, ideally it was a positive response, which it was. And I think that level of trust between author and illustrator for picture books is pretty crucial for making like a truly collaborative piece of art, because, you know, no one wants to be strong-handed and told how to do their own craft, which they're experts at on individually. But when they're coming together to do something together, it really is like, I had no feedback on Maria's text and she had no feedback on my illustrations. But when it was married together, it really did become like this third thing that was very wonderful. And, you know, that's the best case scenario. So, and it was the same with the previous book, The Strange Birds of Flannery O'Connor as well, where I was left to my own devices to try and figure out that nonfiction world, which also told the story of the life of another, you know, living thing, which was Flannery O'Connor. So having that experience, I think, really helped, except that this story had just like the, you know, the entire universe inside of it. So it was a little bit longer.
Well, yeah, it actually makes me, I just kind of realized, I bet Flannery O'Connor would have loved The Snail with the Right Heart. I bet that seems like it would have been right up her alley. I wonder maybe if there's I have one spread in mind, but I wonder if you guys wanted to talk, if there's a maybe a spread or a sequence that you guys wanted to talk about that was kind of a, you know, that maybe you could talk about the process of finding a solution. I was thinking of the you know, I mean, we can talk about there's a number of things spreads I'd love to talk about, but I was thinking specifically of this, there's a beautiful, kind of in the middle of the book, in some ways, I keep getting this wrong here with the, doing the thing here. I'm not a very good, but as you can see, there's this beautiful, there's a big chunk of text here. This is probably the longest, this has got to be the longest single piece of text in the book, right? It's three pretty long paragraphs, and it's all about you know, it's about kind of genetics and how that works, and then you fold it up to this beautiful thing, and you can kind of, the snails, there's sort of snails mating, I guess, somewhere in there, I think. But yeah, maybe if you guys want to talk about that, because I know that was kind of an interesting, that was kind of an interesting process to find that solution for that part of the story, right?
Ping, do you want to jump in, or should I jump in?
I think you should start.
Oh, okay. I mean, right. So that's not only a long text, but it's a necessary text. I mean, I think we looked at it so many times, hoping that there was something we could lop off, you know, and we could talk with Maria and go like, do we really need this? But everything there is necessary, and so we had to find a solution that would allow that text its place and space and like breathing room around it. And so we, you know, it's one of the last things we did, and we couldn't really solve it because whenever we figured like it takes a whole page. And so like all of our thinking was around, you know, if we give it a whole page, that means sort of the garden of life, you know, this whole space in which kind of like genes and genetics and everything is flowering is just this teeny little plot on one page. And that seemed like not to work at all. And we thought, well, what if we had the garden over a double page spread and turn the page to this text? And we didn't like that solution either, because the turning of the page is the passing of time. And so it would create a kind of significant distance between these two things, which were meant to live together. And Ping, you know, showed up at the studio quite a bit, and we were looking at this and looking at this again and looking at books with gatefolds. And we didn't want to use a gatefold that would just be there kind of in a fancy way and not purposeful. And suddenly we understood that like if there was ever a purpose to a gatefold, it was for this moment that would allow the text to have the space it needed, because it's such a significant piece of text. And then we could open and not only have a double page spread, but 3 pages for this like lush, expansive garden. And I think the minute we thought of it, we really knew it was the way to go, as far as I remember it.
It must have been really fun painting that whole garden too. I imagine must have been a real like, oh, I can't wait to do this once you thought of it.
Oh yeah, that was the whole book. I don't have like favorite spreads. The whole thing is like a whole story, right? Like, and choosing what to work on first is different for everybody, but I particularly enjoyed the colorful aspect of that page. But I think what Claudia was saying about coming to this decision of making the gatefold in the book was it was something we couldn't have predicted in the beginning, because breaking up the text to see how that passage of time as the pages turn would feel, and the pacing of the story is something you need to kind of make all these sketches to feel what's right. You have to leave space for text. You have to see if like what you're carrying over from a previous page into the next one. There's all these considerations to be made, and maybe there are some people out there who kind of think about all the design possibilities of their story and like utilizing all their like die cuts or like page size and all that kind of stuff in a different way. But I think I was really trying to experience it as like these full spreads, like every single spread or every page is like a double page spread, full bleed. This book is very much like it doesn't have like one page of text and one illustration, or like vignettes of illustrations kind of coupled with text broken up around it, like as if they were separate little illustrations as well. And there's no like design wordplay in the same way as some other books with like much less text. So it wasn't something that came naturally. And I think once we did land on that, that's why I felt like such a eureka moment, because it was like having these two extreme crescendos meeting at once, where like you had all these other pages where you could kind of compromise the spacing to leave an openness for the text, or like there's very little text on another page where you have like a very full illustration, and you kind of play this balancing game between text and image throughout the book. But this one was like very much like both were kind of essential, and I think we did a good job with that spread, Claudia. Like we managed to kind of save the importance of the text and give it something to live alongside, which was like this kind of open garden. And hopefully, readers will also feel like they're stepping into a different world and it's existing in the same moment in the story. So I really love that page.
Yeah, just as a little side note, the whole sort of publishing framework around Enchanted Line is pushing us to make an ebook of this book, and which, okay, but the thing is that this spread we're talking about cannot be rendered in an ebook. There is no way to do a gatefold. There's nothing for us to do to capture what we've just been discussing, other than like lop off all the garden and like put the text with one page of image, And so far I've been telling everybody, no, it's impossible. We can't do an ebook because there's no way to encapsulate like the organic kind of necessity of like what happened in the physical book.
Well, it's really such a great example of really using the medium of a picture book in a way that's totally organic to that medium, and it doesn't really translate.
No.
Yeah.
No, exactly.
So please get your hands on the physical copy if you can.
Yeah.
It will be a fun experience.
I just wanted to go back a couple of steps and say that there were moments in the process where we did meet with Maria, and there were, even if it was just a word she said, or like, she'd see a sketch and we would understand that like we had to rethink. Sometimes there was just the clarification that would come from, a single word, which was a kind of fascinating thing to help us understand that like the moment we were thinking about wasn't quite right.
Can you remember a specific example of that? That's so interesting.
did you want to share some of your sketches and some of what we had abandoned?
Yeah.
I think, sort of
which
wrong
I think
turns and stuff are so interesting.
Yeah.
So the way that I was working with Claudia to show you my sketches basically was after kind of the very small thumbnails, kind of using digital color to kind of paint a very quick picture of what the spreads will look like. So although this may look like very little, it was like this gradient from blue to black of the first spread. And then we have like the following spread of like a lighter blue. But in the actual picture book, after we had talked, we decided we needed some kind of brush strokes to kind of liven up this page and show movement of the small like mutation moving up towards the sky or to land. And one spread that we changed was also this one. This was a spread that originally was supposed to be the one of all the kind of creatures walking
Oh, the sort
along
of
the land.
evolution, yeah, the million years in one spread, yeah.
And this is an example of like taking this corner of like the water and the sunset and turning that into its own spread of like the snail by itself on land for the first time, and then distilling the rest of this on the next spread, and it's kind of showing that as like a future past like the emergence of snails. So being able to break this up into 2 spreads was great because it gave the pacing an appropriate amount of time. Like maybe that one page flip was like millions of years, and trying to cram everything on one spread here wasn't working very well. But the detail of this spread is very arbitrary. Like these are obviously not creatures or people, but it was again trying to get a sense of like the color and the size, just kind of a general, parade of creatures. And this was my sketch. So if there is anyone watching who's looking to illustrate children's books, sometimes this is your ideas on paper.
I love that though. You see though that like even though it's sort of abstract, it has that great sense of movement that carried through to that final drawing that we've looked at.
Right. And I'm also very lucky that I during this process was able to talk to Claudia in person and show her these ideas, and we could kind of figure them out together. Whereas I'm not sure if that's a relationship or like as easily accessible for, other publishers or other illustrators. So I felt very fortunate that Claudia was open to being able to kind of have this very hands-on experience of helping me through all these spreads and making these decisions together. But, another one being this spread of the scientist who discovers Jeremy for the first time. It was originally like a more pulled back view, as if he had kind of left the parade of people or creatures from the previous spread, and that he like breaks away and is like the one to discover the snail again. So you kind of go from snail to creatures to person to snail again. But we realized that we really needed kind of to zoom in again on Jeremy, and
I'm going to show your final.
Yes.
The final.
So we went really close to his feet in order to see Jeremy, kind of
where's
how
Jeremy here? Yeah.
Yeah, you'll have to find him on your own time. Because part of the reason why he's so small is also because it gives the viewer the opportunity to kind of find Jeremy themselves. And, playing around with like the scale change from along with the time shift, right? Like we're talking about something super, super small to super, super big, like the universe, and having to make those decisions was also like, I don't want to give anyone vertigo, but like we're trying to work in a smooth way. So the spread that definitely didn't make its way in when we were originally kind of going through ideas was this one, which I'm not sure how well you can see, but it's basically it says Jeremy is looking for love, and it was like an online dating profile for Jeremy, because at a certain point, because of the way that his shell is coiled, snails need to find like a snail identical to itself, because the way that they like wrap themselves around each other when they're mating requires, like, the anatomy just simply doesn't work if your shell is the other way. So he's literally like one of a kind. So there was the problem solving of like how to figure out what a snail that's like the loneliest snail in the world in a way, and how he's supposed to find a partner in this world in which he was only just recently discovered to be the opposite of everyone else. So we had to kind of figure out what the tone of the book would be. Like figuring out the colors is one thing, but also trying to see to what degree of humor, to what level of, seriousness or somberness it is. I think those kinds of decisions were also made in the sketch process. So like, I remember very clearly, like Claudia and I were, I thought this was funny, but it wasn't the right thing for this story. Like once you look at the book in its entirety now, like you could never imagine this page in it. But it was one of those things where it needed to happen in order for us to kind of shift gears into the direction it needed to go into. But if all else fails, I still have this sketch here for myself to laugh at alone.
Well, I think you should save that, and I think that's a whole nother book. The Snail and the dating service. The dating service for animals. You can do a whole nother
yeah,
do a whole nother thing with that.
And that's also like a stretch for a nonfiction book, right? Like we're interpreting a lot, and that is definitely not something that actually happened. But there was a call to help find potential mates, which in a very far-fetched way, it was kind of like asking the entire world to help find him love, which isn't what, or is not what online dating sites are not trying to do, if that made any sense.
Yeah.
So
no, I can see
anyway,
that.
that was my thinking.
That's the kind of thing where, we were talking earlier about that, the kind of the balance between kind of, visual poetry and real poetry and sort of, the discipline of nonfiction. I can see that felt like maybe that's where it's just like just the string broke a little too far or something.
Yeah.
Here, I'll show you that this is I do love this spread where I guess this is kind of what you ended up with. This is kind of the analogy where this is people, they put the word out throughout all of Britain, I guess all of the world maybe, right? To find another, Jeremy, that's the Cetus and Veritas we were talking about. So his besides having his heart on the right, also his shell coils left instead of coils to the right, I guess clockwise instead of counterclockwise or vice versa. But anyway, so these are all the people, the word has gone out and people are trying to find another sort of left coiling snail for Jeremy to, potentially mate with.
Right. And it's like, there's the people illustrated on that spread are not necessarily like the exact people, but the idea of like everyone from kids to like grandparents looking in their gardens to try and see if maybe they had a snail just lurking around in their like garden. Just that visual in my mind was quite fun and, didn't have to be interpreted literally. Like this person found this snail, therefore like they must be depicted in reality. So.
Claudia, do you want to talk about like editing at all? When we were talking before, you mentioned there's a few times where maybe, you would change one word or take one word out that would make a big difference in terms of the text. Is there like a specific example of that you'd like to talk about?
Oh, I mean,
or just the process in general of working with Maria.
I mean, the editing process was pretty minimal, and the text really came quite fully formed. I mean, I think when we really got to the illustration stage, and we were working through the spreads, and we were working through the page breaks, and kind of like understanding how word and image were going to relate to each other and find space across the book. Maria and I talked about looking back at the manuscript and seeing if there were any words that could go, any passages that could be tightened up a little bit, kind of in the for the sake of clarity, and also just for the sake of space. And so Maria went into the editing process in that way, but really very little changed. And I think what I was referring to before, just in terms of like a word or so on, I mean, I think with the page that it was in regard to the illustration, and I think the page that Ping just showed with the blue in the corner, where we broke that up into two spreads, we visited with Maria a couple of times, and I think with this one, she simply said sort of like, well, you've lost millions of years. Like we need time. We need like time. Time is one of the characters in this book, and it was important for us to always acknowledge the presence and kind of passage of time.
So that's the sea that you
that
saw in the corner of the illustration.
Exactly that cosmic moment of sort of like coming out of the big sea and soup of
cuts
light.
to this again. So yeah.
So it's a really really crucial moment, and it was just sort of like all Maria had to say was like time, and it was perfectly clear that we had lost time and we had to open up that space again. And even though Ping has been talking about there was no way to capture millions of years, that this moment from the soup to the land, from that really sort of had to be captured and shown for us to then make the next transition.
Well, again, what I love about that too, it's just so, it's the page turn is so intrinsic. It's such an important part of the art of a art of a picture book, and it's just that's a magnificent example of that. It looks like we've hit the 40-minute mark. I wonder if we should we open it up to questions now? Is there anything else you guys wanted to touch on before we do that?
Well, before we open it up to questions, can we say, Bruce, that you are about to have your own picture book?
Yes, I'm very excited.
Published on March 30th, called "The Happiness of a Dog with a Ball in Its Mouth."
Actually, I'm happy to plug that too.
Yes, you should. It's
go.
with Claudia.
Because
with
you know all about page turns, right?
Yeah.
Right, and gatefolds and so on. So
yeah, we do have some gatefolds in here. So yeah, if you got the hunger for gatefolds now, yeah, there's a lot of. Well, I think that's one thing that's great about Enchanted Lion, because you really, you're not afraid to really sort of go all out, in terms of the actual medium. I mean, there's a beautiful moment in the Flannery O'Connor book that I don't want to spoil, but that uses some special ink in a way that I think is just really wonderful. So
Claudia, I think all of your books with Enchanted Lion, the most beautiful thing about them is that they all feel very intentional, the way that they're presented and designed and illustrated. Like the whole feeling of the books themselves are like their individual selves, which I find to be very special, and which is why having at least these 2 books with you is just such a pleasure and an honor to, see a story be illustrated and depicted in kind of like the best way it can be. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Ping. But I mean, books are art and commerce, and I'm much better on the art side than the commerce side. So,
well, hopefully, I think we got to believe, right? If you take care of the art, the commerce will follow. I hope.
Yeah, but the bottom line, I think all these gatefolds and special effects are not so good for the bottom line, right? But we're focused, right? We know what we're doing, and we're focused on the picture book and the space of the book. So that always comes first.
The money's on the screen, as they say in Hollywood. So, so should we open it to questions? There.
Yes, thank you so much to you all. What a great discussion. And on the very last point there, one that is dear to my heart, because what a challenge it is to bring art and commerce together so that we can keep making art, right? Keep putting art in the world. So just want to remind our viewers that, definitely treat yourself to this beautiful print book. And if when you do it at a reading, I know we're not at a reading, but when you do it with us, you're still supporting your event host, and you're supporting a great independent bookstore and the publisher and the artists. And if you're not going to do it with us tonight, do it at your local independent. But make sure that you're part of that process of bringing art and commerce together, because we all need to be in it, I think. We do have some great questions, and the first maybe Claudia can start with, but because you've all spoken so eloquently about the collaboration, bringing the text and the imagery together. What about the typography? It seems like another crucial element that has so many choices, and I thought we sort of saw it vividly when Ping showed that rejected drawing with the handwritten text, and how it sort of changes the feel of the page. So how do you decide on the final fonts and how the role that's going to play in the book?
Well, the graphic designer for this book is a really terrific one. His name is Jonathan Yamakami, and Ping worked with him for the first time on the Flannery book. So this was a second round together. And then Maria knows his work from the Velocity of Being book that we all did together. And so he studies the art and works with the manuscript, and comes up with a number of recommendations. And then I think, Ping, you had many conversations with Jonathan about the font beyond the design and the layout, just to pin that down at the start. I mean, looking for something very specific. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, and it's also like letting Jonathan do what he does best, which is design.
Sure.
I think the thing though, and I can't exactly, I can't remember the exact name of the font used for this book, but I do remember that he proposed a few different ones, and the reason why we picked this one had to do with the name of the font itself, which I unfortunately cannot remember, but it had something to do with like the universe and like this kind of infinity idea. And sometimes that's all it takes, right? Like the font for the Flannery book was also named after someone who was well known for drawing birds, like a designer. Like there's all these little kind of Easter eggs within, you know, the art and design community. So, you know, when you find something like that, it really is hard to kind of let go of, and it adds a layer of sentimentality that is really near and dear to like the people who made the story. So I think, sorry, I'm in a shared space that is obviously they're not aware of what I'm doing right now. I'm sorry. So basically, yeah, it has a few like back and forth moments of trying to decide like what fits best, like visually, but at the same time, also there's dogs. At the same time, trying to figure out like compositionally and spatially, like what's the best for each of these pages that we're trying so hard to like figure out the spacing for. So that was a very long-winded version of that answer.
Yeah, but Jonathan brings a lot to the table. He really brings a lot to the table and shows up with good fonts that already speak to the ideas and the style of art and so on.
Wonderful. And it kind of leads to another question as well, which I'm particularly fascinated with, and I hope Bruce will also chime in on this. What age group do you imagine a book like this is for? And in some ways, I sort of connect that to the font, because you have the challenge here of, you know, talking about these, like explaining recessive genes and making a thing that seems to be pushing the envelope on what we think of as maybe as a picture book or a children's book.
I mean, I see this, despite its sophistication and complexity, as a book for children and a book for readers of all ages. There's nothing in the book that would make it not for children. And we are, as a publisher, we are about to begin publishing picture books that are distinctly for older readers, that will have subject matter and a complexity to them that would not make them suited to the youngest readers. But in this case, I think that there's the wonder, the sense of wonder, the sense of openness, the relationship with kind of like nature and beauty. It's all bespeaks where a child lives and doesn't, I think, you know, and it's not all going to be understood at the same level by a 5-year-old as by someone who's 10 or 12. But there would be no reason not to share this book with the youngest of children, for them to just appreciate and take it in and live within its pages and derive whatever wonder it is that they derive from it.
I was thinking also too, just the fact that there's the jumps in scale and perspective and size. I mean, that's kids' worlds, right? They're always looking up, they're looking down, they're being
They're being
too excited. Yeah, no, that seems like.
I think there's so much that I think a kid would just kind of organically connect to in this book.
I think that's a great point. Yeah, that's a great point about the perspectives. They're very kid perspectives. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I have memories from childhood that I remember things so large, but, you know, in actuality, you're like, this was the size of our room, when, you know, like these kinds of things that create memories really also help this kind of storytelling about like perspective and like kind of zooming in and out of things. And yeah, I mean, Bruce also said that he learned a lot about snails during this book. So
exactly. Kids love how stuff works. Kids are endlessly curious about the world they live in. So, I mean, it's really just a perfect children's book.
Right. And I love that you used the well-worn phrase, readers of all ages, because I find it's very actually accurate. And I know that when I give a book like this as a gift, which I'll be doing a lot with this one, I often I sort of realize I'm really giving this to more than one person, because they're going to share an experience together often, or they're going to have an adult read it to them or with them. And that's a really good feeling, actually, kind of getting in that all ages experience. Ping, someone wants to know a little more about your process. You did go into it delightfully on some of the metaphor level and that, but I think they might be asking a little more practical stuff too, especially like, do you begin with color, since that was such an important element in this book? Do you use computer tools in your drafting process? A little more about how it works.
Sure. I will try and keep it as brief as possible, but I did all the paintings with gouache on paper, and I painted them basically to scale, if not a little bit larger than the actual print size. The beginnings of the book basically start with like very basic sketches, notes, lots of writing, kind of thumbnails. This was actually the one about the gatefold later when we tried to figure out the details of that. But from the very beginning, it's like very rough little thumbnails, pencil sketches, like this big, just trying to get the whole story out. And then these spreads that I was showing are actually done in the computer. I will scan in those tiny thumbnails and just like drag them out because it's not going to be printed anywhere. I just need the kind of skeleton of that original drawing so that I can throw colors on top of it digitally. I use Photoshop and digital brushes on a Cintiq tablet, which is like a digital tablet, like a larger iPad that you connect to your computer, and you're able to select colors like you would with a mouse cursor and like kind of drop in fields of color. I also, while I'm doing that, I'm like making kind of a palette based on paints that I actually own. So before this book in particular, and like any project, I actually have all my paints painted out like swatches, and I've scanned that and translated all those actual paint colors into digital versions so that when I'm doing my digital sketches, they're based on a palette that exists in real life. So when I'm making a painting, it then isn't a color that only exists in the computer, like a lot of fluorescent colors or neon colors. I can't necessarily replicate, so I don't even use them in these sketches. So all of these colors are based on paints that I own. And then once I have like a sketch that's approved, it's like something like this as well. This is in the proportion of like the larger spread. This itself is actually not as big as it needs to be. So aside from this sketch, I'll print it to the size that I'm going to be painting it, which usually takes up like 2 papers. And then I'll transfer that onto the painting paper that I use, which is called BFK Reeves. It's a printmaking paper, and I use a light box, and I take the line drawing. Yes. I'll take the line drawing and transfer it onto the paper. And then from there, I will use my color map, my color sketch, and produce the painting from that. I do all the problem solving basically through the digital sketch. So I don't have to kind of solve my color problems as I'm painting, because if there's any painters out there or artists, they know that, you know, like I said earlier, color is relative. If you put down a color and all of a sudden you're putting another color next to it and it's too dark or it's too light or it's too the same, then it kind of messes up the entire piece. So it has helped me a lot to kind of figure out all the problems that I need to solve ahead of time. And then when it comes to the actual painting, then I'm just painting and listening to podcasts and audiobooks, you know, like something I don't actually have to think about decision making anymore. And I'm just like technically painting. So that is hopefully a good summary of my process. And this is also true for just like the work that I do normally, which is, you know, just freelance illustration. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's great to hear about that blending of the physical and digital worlds in the process. Thank you. And thanks to you all for this rich discussion. It's just been so great. We're really looking forward to future books from all of you, from Enchanted Lion, including Bruce's new book, and hopefully to seeing you again at some point, whether it's here in our virtual world or in the coming real world. We can't wait. Thanks again for being with us. And to our audience, thanks for watching. Don't forget to find the snail with the right heart, and good night.
Thanks, everybody.